What time was you up at the polling?
Okay, well, welcome you all to the dedication of the Pioneers Wall. I'm sorry it had to be cancelled last year because of COVID, and until 2 days ago we thought it was going to have to be cancelled again. So let's try and get it over and done with, and let's hope we can get through a successful afternoon. Okay, the background is in 1885 Glenbrook was proclaimed a village. Now our society wanted to acknowledge the pioneers of the district who contributed to the early settlement up to 1935. This was later extended to 1950. Now the Pine Hall was constructed with the assistance of the Blue Mountain City Council, adjacent to the entrance of the Glenbrook Visitors Information Centre. Plaques were provided and paid for by the families of the early pioneers. On the 20th of March 2008, the Pioneers Wall was opened by Blue Mountain City Council Mayor Jim Angel. There were 15 plaques installed. On March 2014, members and guests gathered on the occasion of adding 8 more plaques to the Pioneers Wall. In March 2018, the Visitors Information Centre was closed for renovation. This meant the Pioneers Wall had to be demolished, and in November 2018 a new wall was constructed by the council near the Information Centre, which is the current wall we have now. In 2019, 18 plaques were added. It was planned to have this dedication ceremony in April 2020, but this was cancelled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The event was rescheduled to September 2020, but again had to be cancelled due to COVID-19 restrictions on the number that could be attended. It was rescheduled to May 21, 2021, and we're here today. I'd like to call our Mayor, Mark Greenhill, up to announce to you the current families that will be ensconced on the wall. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. I'm a little bit nervous because I can see we've got a tough crowd here today. And I've been mayor for 8 years and on council for 20, but this is a trepidatious moment for me. Can I just acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Darug and the Gunnegarra peoples, and on behalf of us all, acknowledge elders of the Blue Mountains, past and present, because this was, and this always will be Aboriginal land. Can I do a quick roll call, if I may, to see who we have here today? Do we have any of the Nolan family here? G'day, Nolans. The Hammett family. My friend Joan Peard sits in front of me. The Skarratts?
No, they're not here today.
No?
Oh yes.
We got some Skarratts?
Yeah.
Awesome. Henry Messer? Awesome. What about the Woods? Have we got some Woods here?
No, they're all deceased.
Well, we acknowledge them. The Fosters? The Prices? We got any Prices here? Eric?
Oh, no, this is Price Butler.
Price Butler, all right. We've got Prices here. Coleman and Bruce families. Geez, there's a big faction of the Coleman Bruces here today. What about the Butlers?
Yep, there you go.
There he is. G'day, mate. How are you? Sam Hood family.
No, all deceased.
McConvilles.
Yes, I'm representing them.
We got all right. Well, you're like a multi-juncture of families, Joan. The Parslows.
Yes.
There's a big group of them here. The Callaghans.
Callaghan.
Look at them all. Callaghans, I should say. My apologies. Been knelt at mass with the Callaghans. Good to see you. The Carter family. Leon, those lights.
There you go, mate.
Bev, the real power behind the throne. The Evans family. G'day, Evans. Boyce family.
Yes.
I hear the deep voice of the Boyces. The Reid family.
No.
The Rowe family.
No.
No? And have I missed any other families from those pioneers in the first half of the 20th century? The Skarratts, I said them early on. The Knowles group over here. All right, how can we miss that? Can I just say something about those families? We were founded as a village. Control the mob over there, would you, mate? We were founded as a village back in about 1885, I think it was. And up until the middle of the 20th century, the families and others that I've mentioned here today were the people that made Glenbrook. The local schools, the local churches, the shops, the homes, our park right here, I think the School of Arts was somewhere over there. These are the families that made this community. And you look at how Glenbrook is now, how crowded it is on a weekend afternoon, how much people love coming here. Well, these are the families that made it happen. This really is the gateway to the Blue Mountains. And really the reason I'm here today is to acknowledge your families and your contribution to making this wonderful place what it is. I've only been here 30 years, so I'm an outsider, although I think being mayor gives me a couple of extra points. But you are the people that made Glenbrook, and that's why we're here today to honour you. So I want to thank the Historical Society for having the care and dedication to remember the great contribution that your families and your forebears all made, and you yourselves, people like Joan, who were part of it. But I, as the Mayor of the City, want to also pass on my personal thanks to you for being the wonderful, special glue that you are that created the wonderful community we live in today. So thank you very much for having me here today.
Pleasure, Mark.
Thank you to the Historical Society, and thank you mostly to all of you.
Thank you. Group photographs, family photographs, so we can keep a permanent record. Part of our society is keeping track of family histories, and we try to build them up. And we've got very good records of the previous two dedication ceremonies here, and we'd like to add this one to the score that we have. So if you like, we'll try and organise you into family groups, and if not, I noticed in the old days everybody used to get on the steps, but I don't know how many people got here. I don't think we'll fit on the steps. No. Okay, so let's organise ourselves into families so we can get to organise the photographs. Later on, we'll move over to the club for afternoon tea. The food will be served about 3:15, so we have to get ourselves organised and get over there by 3:15. So
You're looking this way. Oh, we've got some rings on the end.
In those days, it didn't matter.
Walking now, lose weight.
They heard it all?
Lose weight.
Oh,
But I
good,
don't.
yeah.
The first one is contribution here, sounds like the Argonauts, looking from way back, and unfortunately about 3 years ago he had a bleed on the brain, and it's left him somewhat disabled in his thinking sometimes, but anyhow he's done this speech and I think it's pretty snazzy that he's been able to do it. Here we go. This is his idea, it's not mine. We arrived in Glenbrook in 1947, which is actually 1946, but never mind. I am embellishing it already. After World War II, our father Norman died of war injuries in 1946. He and Mum were living in New Zealand when the war was declared, and he volunteered on the first day. I expect Mum was really upset at the position she found herself in with 3 children. Me, 6, Mick, 4, and Robin, who some of you will remember, 2, and no husband. With the help of her parents, she had a house built at Explorers Road, Glenbrook. Although Mum must have been terribly sad, we children were never burdened with her loss. She was always upbeat about her life and conveyed to us that she was so lucky to have us. We were her life, of course, and she was ours. I never really knew my father, and I never felt upset at losing him. I really didn't know, especially as we had a strong mother and life in Glenbrook was so good. And I've done something here. Managed well. Who would turn up on his bicycle but the Reverend Harold Rawson, who some of you will remember, the Anglican minister. He had been a soldier in World War II, a fighting soldier, not a priest, and really understood Mum's. As a result, he encouraged Mum to attend the church and became involved with the Anglican community, including the annual flower show. We as children also raced off to, or were inveigled into going to Sunday school, and were eventually confirmed. Don't know whether this is sort of good. Yeah, in many ways the interest of Reverend Rawson, and this is Mick's favourite person, the headmaster of Glenbrook Primary School, Arthur Cyril Murphy. Mick talked, if you mention the word Glenbrook to Mick, the next words that come out of his mouth are Arthur Cyril Murphy. Yeah, they formed a solid moral compass which we three children enjoyed. We then went off to Penrith High School, and I've always felt quite privileged that we belonged to the village of Glenbrook. Arthur Cyril Murphy, chair, thank you, had a way of making every child of the school honoured to be a member, and I remember that so clearly. It was a miracle in a way that Mum's initial sadness evaporated under community support, and she would enjoy life so much. She was really a positive person, and the happiness of Glenbrook community lifted her enjoyment of life. The influence of those fine men and the blessing of a small, loving village meant so much to us, or we children, whatever I'm supposed to say there. We spent endless, glorious times in the country bush of Glenbrook with the Scouts and our Cubs, and our closest mate, Donald Skarratt, who is not here today, the weak bastard, who was brought up by his grandmother on the edge of the Blue Mountains. Our special playing ground was bordered by Glenbrook Creek and the Nepean River. I remember so clearly swimming in the crystal clear water, Mick, you really wax lyrical, of the Blue Mountain streams, paddling homemade tin canoes in the Nepean River and climbing rock edges down into Glenbrook Gorge. We understood the bush and we felt we belonged to it. The bush was a different in our lives. We all enjoyed other things that the school kids of that age had. We loved birthday parties, fancy dress balls, tennis, cricket, marbles. Evelyn Foster was the marble champion. And running in the playground at after school functions. One of the special things our family was barbecues, picnics after school with chops. And we used to ask friends to come with us, and we'd have chops and peanut butter on fresh bread. It was a time of true friendship. This is Mick talking. I still have the letters that I wrote to Don Skarratt, and the letters he wrote back to me 50 years on. We still communicate now and then, after nearly 80 years of age, always toasting to many more reunions. For those of you who live here, don't underestimate the true spirit of this small village they call Glenbrook.
Richard, I was Barbara Bruce, and I came to Glenbrook when I was 4.5 years old. I don't know how many people here will remember the Japanese submarines coming through into Sydney Harbour. But at that time, most mothers and children left the city to come and live in country areas. How many people remember that? Thank you.
My mother put me under the bed.
When we first came to Glenbrook, we took a house called Blue Hills, which was next door to the Roseberries, who were another old Glenbrook family, and and Auntie Paula Coleman, Mum's sister, and I all lived together in great harmony. Everybody got on very well together. The two things I do remember clearly about Glenbrook later on, not when I was 4.5, but now, are that for the first time women were independently, not wealthy exactly, but had money of their own, because all the men who were away fighting had their salaries paid into a joint bank account, and the women had access, and for the first time they could say how money was spent and what we did with it. And of course, during the war we had very little to do with it. We had the rationing with the ration books, we were rationed for tea, sugar, butter. Come on, what else we rationed?
Beer.
Petrol, you name it. So there was very little, and we had 2 shops in Glenbrook. We had the little general store, and the biggest treat was lemonade ice blocks wrapped in newspaper, and the butcher, who was one of those saintly men who slaughtered his own beef and allowed all the families from Glenbrook to have a little bit of extra meat each week. And we're very thankful to him because you get very sick of tripe and liver then. The two things that came to me later on in life were two things that happened in Glenbrook. One was the women having independent income. The other was, at that stage in Australia's history, there was a terrific divide between the Catholic religion and the Protestants. And when we first came to Glenbrook, the Catholic children went to the Catholic school in the hill, and everyone else went down to the local school down here. And our headmaster wasn't the saintly Mr. Murphy. We had Mr. Waterhouse, who was also a saintly man. Mr. Waterhouse used to march us out into the playground every morning, and you all probably remember this, I don't know, but you might. And we used to stand in a row, erect, saying, I honour my God, I serve my King, and I salute my flag as the flag went up the flagpole. And we all saluted and stood, and I think we might have sung God Save the King. I can't remember that. The highlight of Mr. Murphy, Mr. Waterhouse, was that he really was before his time. He tried to teach us about the weather. And every Friday we had to say what sort of clouds are in the sky. I still can't do it. My mother bought a book from, she went to town, she bought a book. She and I, Paula and I, used to stand in the backyard every Friday morning staring at the sky, saying, please, 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 let us get it right today. And we very rarely did. But he was a great headmaster. We had a little one-room schoolhouse with glass partitions. Does anyone else remember this? Yep. And I think kindergarten, first, second and third were in one room and the rest of the school was in the other. And the highlight was the monthly delivery of the magazine to the school, which had stories and puzzles and all sorts of things. And it was an enormous treat because there were no books or any of the things that are available today. We also listened to the ABC, who had all sorts of programs for children. And it was a very simple, very, very pleasant life. The thing about the division between the religions was that it didn't really occur in Glenbrook. The children might have gone to different schools, but after school everybody played together, everybody had fancy dress balls together, and everybody had sports and in the local playground and local park actually. I'm very grateful. It gave me a very pleasant and happy childhood, and I would like to thank the Glenbrook Historic Society for giving us this opportunity to come together and remember what a very nice life it was. Thank you very much.
My great-great-grandfather was Henry Messer, and it's wonderful that we now have a little plaque there to tell people about the Messer family. I've got a picture of him there. He was born in 1839 in Sydney, and when his father died 2 years later, his mother married Joseph Popplewell. And Joseph Popplewell became the first Mormon convert in Sydney. And a few years later, Joseph Popplewell and Emily Messer, Henry's mother, went off to Salt Lake City to see the Mormons over there. So Henry, aged 14, and his older brother William, who Coleman is descended from, were left to their own devices here. They went off to the goldfields, of course, and must have travelled up via Penrith, Glenbrook, or as it wasn't here yet, but over the mountains to out to Hill End Way. William made his fortune, got some money, and settled in Molong, and Henry came back to Penrith and then the Glenbrook area. He worked on the railways. He married Margaret Millen, whose father was a convict butcher down in Penrith, and they settled up here on a farm, which we don't know exactly where it was, but it was somewhere over this side of the highway. And we know quite a bit about their family life because my great-grandfather, Henry Messer, used to write letters to his sister and remembering what had happened while they were here. They were here between about 1873 and 1886. Margaret, mother of 11 children, they loved their family life on the farm. She would come over to the main road and they would sell butter. She made butter, they'd sell their eggs, they had bacon, all sorts of things. They had the Jersey cows on their land, and they would often go over to Europa Clearing and collect quinces from over there and bring them back to their farm life. Every time Margaret had a baby, the whole 11 of them, Henry, who worked for the railways, would put her on the Fettler's trolley and they would shuttle down the railway to Penrith, where her mother would deliver the babies in Penrith. They were here until 1886, and the son Henry records that at that time they suffered lots of persecution. We're not sure what that means. We wonder if working for the railways that they were forced to move from their land, which he said they were. They had a beautiful big black retriever dog, and the dog was killed, so that scarred them all for life. And things like that. They moved down to Erskineville, where Henry worked at Everleigh Railways down there. But they loved Glenbrook, and it's been lovely actually to come back again today. I've spent many a days up here wandering around, wondering just where the farm was. But it's been lovely coming up today and having him acknowledged like that. I want to thank Ros and Colin too, because they've done a lot towards getting Henry recognised, and it's just been great. Thank you.
And wife Anastasia arrived in Glenbrook in 1939 with 3 children, William, June and Arthur. Bill worked on the railway at Glenbrook as a ganger and for many years. Bill was an air raid warden during the war years, a member of the Progress Association, as Anastasia was, and she also belonged to the CWA. When the Butler family came to Glenbrook, they lived in Ross Street on the northern side of my family's property. So from the age of 7, I used to play with Arthur and his sister June, who was a few years older than me. But nevertheless, when I became a teenager, I was lucky to be a bridesmaid for June, and I enjoyed that very much. I was one of the brothers. Arthur married the love of his life and lived in Glenbrook with his wife Elaine, who was a Price, until her death a few years ago, and he recently moved up to Buckland's retirement village in Springwood. Now the Price family, Eric and Edith Price owned a weekender in Glenbrook in the 1920s at number 1 Glen Street. They moved to Glenbrook permanently in 1940 with 3 children, Joan, Betty and Elaine. Eric and Edith owned a produce business in Botany, and after selling the business years later, Eric worked for Balgate Fruit Processing Factory at St Mary's. Mrs Price belonged to the PNC. I know that she probably belonged to other organisations as well, as most women in Glenbrook in those days belonged to everything. As a child, I played with Betty and became a very good friend. I would go down to Betty's home to play. It was a great surprise to me. They had an air raid shelter in the backyard. I think it was the only one in Glenbrook at that time. The shelter went down a few steps and under a couple of trees. I couldn't believe what I saw at first, but Betty and I would play in it as a cubby house. I would like to know if that air raid shelter is still there. I know the trees are, they're much bigger now. Elaine, the youngest daughter, married
Arthur Butler. I'm pretty sure he had his eye on her from primary school. I think that's true. I hope so. But Betty and I were very close. But of course, when she married and I married, we parted and we didn't know where one another lived. She probably knew where I lived, didn't we? Anyhow, I hope it's enough for the Butler and Price family.
Personal recollection, I was about 3 years old when my younger brother was born, and we were sent to Barbara, who spoke earlier's family, to live to stay at the house at Green Street, Glenbrook, that we walked across to look at this afternoon. It's still standing. It was built by, as the Plaques says, by Leda Bruce's husband, Purvis, and it was unfinished when he died in the 1950s. And I just have recollections of the butcher's shop with the sawdust on the floor, the milk bar. I remember the the name was Sherlaw's Pharmacy, where I think Leila worked for a time, and there was the various families, and the Leopold family who lived next door, and in a way, I've been through Glenbrook many times. In a way, the village, apart from the widening of the road, and obviously it's expanded to a more suburban sort of feel, the village really still, in my memory, hasn't changed a great deal. And that would be 60 to 65 years since I was here as a very, very young child.
Very good.
I'm Barbara, sister, who you heard from earlier, who lived here during the war with her mother and her aunt in the cottage and went to Glenbrook Primary School. After the war, I was born in 1945, my parents decided for various reasons to come and build a house in Glenbrook, and so we moved up here. And so I had the great enjoyment of attending Glenbrook Primary School. I never realised that Mr. Murphy was Arthur Cyril Murphy. He was always admired, and my mother was always referred to as Mr. Murphy. And Mr. Murphy ran a very tight ship, but it was a very fair one. We had a very structured regime. I remember Friday morning was mental arithmetic, and if you didn't do well, they wouldn't set square, but often find it's face on your head if you fail to get them. I mean, it was fair. Anyway, and then Mrs. Murphy taught sewing. We had singing, as Barbara mentioned. Mr. Murphy, I realised later in life, gave us a wonderful education. So we did. I'm now at the stage of my life very interested in classical music, and it was only in recent years that I realised that the songs that Mr. Murphy had written on scrolls and turned the scroll in the classroom and we learned to sing were Schubert Lieder songs. And so he introduced us to so much stuff that we didn't really recognise that we were learning about. We did gardening, and we did a great deal of Scottish dancing. We did marching in formation on the tennis court in the schoolyard. It was probably, we just took it for granted. That was the way things were, and that was the way the school worked. And you look back at it and you think, we were so lucky to have that kind of genuine professional care from people who actually understood what their duty and their responsibility was in the education of children. Glenbrook was lovely, and all the names here, the Voices, the Skarratts, the Roots Butchery, all of those things are very much a part of Glenbrook, and I imagine still are. I still think you probably, as a community, do still know people. You do still have when I came in and I looked out at the bowling club out there, and the women are bowling on one bowling green and the men on another, and very mixed age groups and very mixed population, and it's it's still very much a proper place to live. So congratulations. Thanks very much.
1943, we lived in Boggabilla, it's on the New South Wales-Queensland border. That's famous for the home of the Wobbly Boot Hotel. Dad was in the RAAF in Borneo during the war, injured and sent to Concord Rehab Hospital, and in the hospital a few times. Eventually he was a TBI, which is totally and permanently incapacitated. Mum moved us to Abbotsford, Sydney, to live with a sister. There was nowhere to rent in those days, so the real estate agent found us a place in Glenbrook, of all places. So from Abbotsford to Glenbrook,
No water.
different. In my opinion, this is the greatest thing that could have happened to our children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren. What a wonderful place to grow up. I'm here today with my eldest brother Stan, Stan's wife Beryl. They celebrated their 71st wedding anniversary the other day. Stan also went to Japan as part of the occupation forces, so he knows a bit about bombed places, Hiroshima. Sister Gwen, who lives now in London, was married to Lawrence Roots, or Rocky Ned as he was known. I'm also here with my wife, Joan, who live in Glenbrook. Thank you to the Historical Society for making this happen.
From Casino. Dad worked for the New South Wales Government Railways. He was transferred here to become the boss ganger to look after the rail line between Plaques and Wimble. When they first came here, I'm the youngest of 12 siblings. I was born 2 years later though. He came here in 1945. As you can realise, there was many houses then to buy in those days. So they had to live in tents at the end of the Glenbrook railway station for, I think it was 12, 18 months or something like that. So he eventually bought a house up in Roscoe Street, or part of the house, and then he set about building a house there. And with the help of Alceste Jackson, he made all the bricks for the blocks for it. Dad built a 4-bedroom colonial, we call Federation style house there, which unfortunately was only knocked down last year, and it's been rebuilt in a brand new home. And I must admit they've pretty well kept the front facade as what it was when Dad built it. But, so it was pretty good. My parents had about 28 grandchildren, over 40 great-grandchildren, and I couldn't tell you after that. I've still got an older brother, my oldest brother, he's 96, he lives up the other side of Casino. Another brother at, where is he, Foster Tuncurry. And I've got 2 sisters at Moreton, and I'm still the youngest. That hasn't changed. But you're talking about Mr. Murphy. Ah, yeah, that's the subject of my heart, that is. Him and I used to get on extremely well, mostly at the end of a stick. I can still remember the day he got that FE model Holden, and he had the old Austin A40 before that. I can tell you the number plate of the Holden was ACM 225. His name was Arthur Cyril Murphy. He had 2 kids, and he'd been married 25 years at that time. So it's still stuck in my mind forever and ever and ever. And, I was born in 1947, so a bit later than some of you older people. I went to the school here. 2 of my sisters went to the school here as well. And we finished our education at the Penrith High School, like most of us did. The only high school around in those days. I got married in 1968 to a local girl from Plaxland, Beverly, and we settled in East Plaxland, and we still reside there today. 2 kids and a few grandkids and a few great-grandkids. Yeah. That's about us. And great. If you want to know anything about Mrs. Murphy, you come and see me. So start again.
I am the daughter of Edward and Dorothy Parslow. Dad worked for the New South Wales Railways. He was transferred from Gaylong, a little town out west of into Glenbrook in 1943 to work on the lines as a fiddler. In those days, his job was to walk the length from Glenbrook to Emu Plains, checking the gauge of the line, and the following day from Glenbrook to Blackstone until a trike became available. You would stand on the trike and push the handle down to get it to move. It saved your legs, but not your back. Mum and Dad had 10 children, 6 boys and 4 girls. Dad built the little cottage in Cowdery Street, Glenbrook. We only ever had the same neighbours, that being Timmy Myers, Betsy and their families, for 70 years. Great people. Dad helped to lay the foundation at St Finbar's School. He was a very busy man. Sister Duane still lives in Glenbrook, Gay at St Mary's, Denis in the city, and I'm at Emu Plains. The boys Western Australia, Victoria and Queensland. We spent a lot of time playing in the bush, going to the blue pool, the duck hole. No PlayStation or TV, just Dad and Dave on the wireless. There is a lot to tell and see in the Blue Mountains. I will leave that for another time. Dad was born in 1912 and passed in 1991. Mum 1911 and passed in 2006. Thank you all for this beautiful day. Until next time, stay safe.
Thank you. Very nice.
It's just so nostalgic listening to everybody talking here because I remember most of those things they're talking about. And as I said, on our plaque in the wall back there, Mick and Rob and I always regard Glenbrook as our spiritual home, and we do thank the committee for including us in the wall. Glenbrook post-war was a wonderful place to live and bring up a family. As Mick noted in his earlier contribution, which I read. I remember being so involved in things like the Cubs, the Scouts. We built the tennis courts. Of course, one of the highlights of the year was the bonfire out on the Oval, which a lot of people will remember. I do remember that we had a big box with all the oldies that contributed to it. Sparky and no more fireworks. Everybody was absolutely shattered. They had flower shows, garden competitions. Loved the bottle drive. You can see how much grog people were drinking. It was really quite interesting to Mick and I and all the Scouts. And of course there was a level crossing and blue pool. When I was thinking about today, I just about to admit I wish I'd been here earlier because it really got to me, but I realised that Glenbrook contained, and I think Barbara hit on it, was that there was a lot of very interesting women here. And I thought I'd just mention a few of them because some of you will remember. There was Elizabeth Skarratt, Don's we used to call her Gran, John's grandmother. What's that? She used to paint. Not Elizabeth, oh, did she, Elizabeth? I didn't know that. But she said you could drink whiskey. And she smoked black and white cigarettes because we used to beat them occasionally. But I always regarded her as the matriarch of Glenbrook, and I do remember her, and some of you remember this at the coronation. She planted a tree on the left-hand, I think it was on the left-hand side of the steps going up to the hall. And her daughter-in-law, Helen Skarratt, or Helen Baldwin,
she was the binder,
is probably a world-renowned artist, but particularly with Pettipoint. And she's in a lot of collections overseas. She's even in the Royal Collection. Her work is regarded as fantastic. And then who could forget Mrs. Knowles? Some on the piano. She was fantastic, absolutely. She played the pride of her, and whatever you wanted, she could pump it out. And she used to drive a thing called a Graham. I don't know whether many of you
Graham,
remember that.
yeah, Graham.
And Grant Knowles, who was my great mate, reminded me that they told me that it was the longest car in Australia at the time, and she used to ladle herself into the back seat. It was a pretty big, and then we'd walk up to Lawson and go for a swim in the swimming pool. That was the closest pool, I think, it's already told. It was really good fun. And then, of course, some of you won't know this woman as well, but I used to go to Madame Morby or Hilda Warby's music house, introduced a touch of culture into Glenbrook, I have to say. And she was great. The music house was terrific. And actually, she brought a lot of people into Glenbrook, who later, I can't remember their names now, of course, but who became quite well famous, or Australia famous, on the musical scene. And the other thing she could do, she could play fantastic jazz. God, she was good. And then there was a woman called Dorothy Green. I don't know whether many of you remember Dorothy Green. Who employed Boysenberry, I have to read this, Boysenberry horticultural contractors and landscape architects. That was my brother Michael and Phil Berry. And they used to do her weeding. I think they were pretty ordinary, but they did it. And it was mixed first effort in entrepreneurship. She later on became headmistress of Canberra Grammar. A few other people, there was Mrs. Rich, some of you remember her, Mrs. Berry, my first cub mistress. Oh God, she was gorgeous. I can't think of the name now. Lived up near Lindsay, but she was fantastic. My first love, I think. There are others, but there we go. I just got 2 more thoughts to mention. One of the things that Glenbrook was very good at was celebrating, but the other thing Glenbrook was very good at was getting behind people who had lost or was down a bit. And I do recall, I remember rallies around, I can't remember all his names. There was Ken McCall, some of you remember him dying of the brain tumour. There was David Richard, who had an accident going into the school at Parramatta. Who else? Shaw, the boy Shaw, Janice Shaw's brother. Leslie. What was his name? Leslie. I thought it was Leslie. Yeah, he died of an electric shock, didn't he? And then there was Phil Berry, who was a great friend of ours, who died about 3 or 4 days before his wedding. Absolutely. His first probably funeral I ever went to. Absolutely tragic. And all died before their time. The other thing I remember, and I hope the Mayor keeps this up because that's his job, but in the corner, wherever we are, up in the big oval area, there's some beautiful gum trees, which the council, not the current council of course, but the council, they're going to knock us over the chin. They're going to pull them down. They brought the bulldozers down to remove them, and Helen Skarratt and my mother stood in front of them and told them to piss off. And they're still standing. So I think my time at Glenbrook, as a lot of people are saying, helped define the rest of my attitude to life. And I thank Glenbrook for it. Thank you. There you go.
And representing the Evans family, and first of all I'd like to read out what was on our plaque. And that gives us a synopsis of what we accomplished in Glenbrook many years ago. So Herbert, better known as Bert and Una Evans, and their son Warren came to Glenbrook in 1945, settling eventually at 27 Explorers Road. They embraced community life by involving themselves in many activities, including the Tennis Club, P&C, School of Arts, Progress Association, CWA and the Boy Scouts. Bert held the presidency of the Tennis Club and P&C for numerous terms. Bert and Una upheld strong civic pride for their village of Glenbrook and lived there until their passing. Now I'd like to recall some of my childhood memories of growing up in Glenbrook. The Evans family moved to Glenbrook in 1945 when Dad was appointed language master at Bainbridge Boys High School. Even though Glenbrook was supposed to be a temporary address, after a year or so my parents realised how much they loved the bush and the village, as it was known in those days, and decided to stay permanently. At that time, I am sure that they did not realise how much Glenbrook would blossom into a thriving town as it is today, and would never have contemplated traffic lights. After living in rental accommodation, which seems to be the thrust of some of the other speeches tonight, for 11 years, Mum and Dad decided to buy a block of land and build their dream home at 27 Explorers Road, Glenbrook, for 265 quid. 265 quid, where Mum lived for 46 years until 2001. My parents were very active members of the community of Glenbrook, as spoke to with the plaque. For instance, Mum was an early member of the country Women's Association. She was involved with the Boy Scouts, Progress Association, Parents and Citizens, School of Arts, Tennis Club, and it goes on. I was the only child, so I was dragged along each time to all these meetings. On many occasions she would meet Dad after training in the afternoons and help him prepare the tennis courts for play that night or for the next day. Some other memories that I remember, participating in Boy Scout bottle drives, Bob a Job Week, and building a bonfire, which was mentioned previously, for Cracker Night or Empire Night, in the middle of the oval. Also, I remember Dad, when I was about 3, piggybacking me all the way up Hare Street. There was no traffic lights there, of course, at that time. And at the age of 12, my first paid job was to prepare the lone tennis courts, where there was an old shed and blackberry bushes and so forth. And then also I remember going to the flicks at night in the School of Arts for 11p. 11p? And in those days you got a newsreel, a cereal, Tom and Jerry, and 2 pictures. These days you're lucky to get one. Being taught in primary school in a classroom where there were more than one class, which was mentioned previously, there was about 3 classes. I don't know how the teacher did it, but he got through. Also seeing the fire engine leaving the station to attend bushfires, because it was exciting for us little kids, not so much for the adults, of course. At weekends, going down the bush all day, which was mentioned before, and only coming home at dusk. So we didn't stay home on our iPads. And also, of course, in that term, being down the bush, we visited the Red Hand Cave, Europa, of course, the Jellyboon Pool, and the Blue Pool. And that's it.
Well,
Donald Frederick Skarratt settled in Mountside, Knapsack Street, Glenbrook, 1905. He married Elizabeth Norris, 1914. They lived there until their deaths. They had 2 sons, Donald Walter and Eric Norris. Eric married Helen Baldwin, who you spoke about. Their son resides locally. Donald had 2 sons, Donald Russell and Anthony John. Donald Russell attended Glenbrook Primary School, 1947 to 53, whilst living with his grandmother at Mountainside. This is from the Reid family. Jack and Doris Reid settled in Glenbrook, 1947, building their home in Cowdery Street, where they lived for 70 years. Daughters Susan and Linda attended Glenbrook Public School, 51 to 62. Doris was Brown Owl of Glenbrook Brownie Pack, and Jack was a life member of the Lower Mountains Netball and Little Athletics Association. The Foster family. Does anybody know the Foster family?
Absolutely. Evelyn Foster was the best mother player in Glenbrook.
Ernest, a policeman, and Winfred Wyameta, 7 Lennox Street, Glenbrook, in April 25. From the Cox family. They had 3 children, Winfred, Sadie and Bill. Win worked at the Blue Mountains Council, might still be there. Sadie was a well-known local artist. Bill, a RAF pilot, died in a flying accident at Parks, 1945. That's the Wood family.
Right.
James Wood and family settled in Glenbrook in 1867 and built Woodville, a house large enough to provide accommodation for railway workers. He worked for the railway and his trade was listed as bridge carpenter. In 1986, James Wood and Charles Champion found the body of murdered Captain Lee Waller.
Yep.
Talk to Doug Knowles, he knows all about it.
He did.
Was it Doug, was it?
No.
No, he knows all about it. James' son Joseph occupied Woodville until its purchased by the Education Department for Glenbrook Primary School in 1961. Sam Hood family, 1872 to 1953. Sam was recognised as the father and pioneer of Australian press photography. He was recognised in an exhibition which documented 25 years of a great Sydney lifestyle. His studio was in Pitt Street, Sydney, and employed many photographers. including his daughter Gladys. Not related to the Premier, I don't think. This studio functioned between 1925 to 1950. The family lived in Glenbrook around 1939 to 1950s. Sam would also photograph functions, including many school photos. Sam died in June 1953. I think that's about all, Joe.
We now want to do the Rowe family. Okay. The Rowe family, Herbert and Fanny Rowe and their daughter Gwenda, who was born in 1921 at Drummoyne, they moved to Glenbrook in 1933 to grow mushrooms in the disused Laxton railway town.
Oh, yes.
They continued this business until 1942 when they were removed by the RAF so the tunnel could be used for World War II bomb and mustard gas storage. They never returned to mushroom growing. Life was hard during the mushroom growing period as they lived in an old work circus tent, and after school Gwenda was employed in growing the mushrooms, a huge task for a young girl. She was a very talented writer and won many awards. She was a sunbeam for the Sydney Sun, and if you go through trade, constantly Gwenda Rowe was receiving awards for writing right from a little girl. She had a tough job. She used to have to get the pit pony manure from Lithgow, straw from Penrith, soil from the creek bed, mix it all up, put it in the tunnel, grow the mushrooms. When they were grown, deliver them down to the railway. Or a young girl up in the rural teen. It's a very hard life. Herbert was employed by the RAF building, while the RAF period, they're building facilities and doing maintenance work at the camp. Gwenda joined the Women's Land Army and she spent her time at Greenhill from 1943 to 1945. When you read books on that period, she's especially quoted, she had the nickname of Skipper Rowe. The family were very involved in local activities, including the Merrymakers, as Herbert had a very fine singing voice. And when she wrote material, performed and directed, and as Tim Myers said, if you didn't do it right, you soon knew about it. And she was also involved with the School of Arts. She was a lieutenant in the Girl Guides, and she organised some of the Glenbrook festivals. Herbert died in 1952. He died of kidney failure, and Gwenda left Glenbrook after attaining her BA, and she taught history for many years. Finally, Gwenda moved to Whitecliffs. There's a whole period in her life where she moved to Jindabyne for a while. She lost all her savings in a financial collapse, and so she was back to where they were in the Depression years when they had to move to Ballura. So she moved to Whitecliffs where the rent was cheap. She got very involved with the history of Whitecliffs. She wrote books up there, and actually, after 1945, she wrote a musical called My Victory, or For Victory, I think it was called, and she received the patent for her on that in 1945. She wrote a lot of material up there. She wrote books, and she was very popular. Unfortunately, she died on the 10th of November 2001, and in the 2002 anniversary award, she was awarded an Australian Order Australia Medal. She's buried in the Whitecliff Cemetery, and she was a very famous character around Glenbrook. A lot of people knew Gwen Rowe. And
Mr. Ross, these plaques here. Done most of the things in Glenbrook that we have today, and they can. I know for a fact that they can all hold their heads up high with their family name. I know most of them, but those I don't, it's been lovely to meet you. In the 1980s, my mother and grandmother would talk about the early families, and I didn't take much notice because I was only a teenager. But it's lovely to see that the wonderful idea that our Historical Society has honoured over many years. Actually now we're 30 years in 2023, so if anybody's interested in coming to look at the museum, we're most grateful. Now I'm not here to talk about my mother or grandmother, but my great-grandmother and father. Richard and Sarah Hammond came to the Blue Mountains from England in 1860s. Richard worked for the railway
as he lived in the gatehouse, which was in Valley Heights, for quite a few years. When Springwood School opened, their daughter Esther, my grandmother, aged 9, and 4 siblings, were first amongst them to enrol in the Springwood School. These children, before Springwood was opened, they had to travel early in the morning and came back late at night by the train. Further up the mountains they went. I don't know what town it was they went to the school, but in those days I think there was only one train up and one down, I don't know. In 1880 they came to Glenbrook, and in 1881 purchased a large parcel of land. Only wish we owned it today. It stretched from Ross Street to Europa Road, Park Street to where the railway car park is, in Burford Parade, and bought it from D. Ross, stonemason, who built the Ilford House property in 8 Bosco Street, for the great sum of £180. So there. Richard and Sarah were very community-minded and helped raise money for the first school, which was built in the northeastern corner of the Glenbrook Park. Their house was built on the corner of Park and Europa Road, and now there's a men's store, hairdresser and a bottle shop where the house stood. Just imagine if the family owned it today, we'd be millionaires. They had 10 children. Our grandmother was one of the youngest children and married John Cahoon Dunn, a stonemason who built the 3 stone houses in Moore Street. Esther was married in the family home in 1886 and had 8 children and 5 boys and 3 girls. The little lay-by that goes into the information centre is called Hammond Place, but before that, before the road was widened, there was a street that ran down between Park Street, and the highway. But when the road was widened, they just made this little lay-by. There's never been a plaque or anything or a sign put up, so I'm hoping that the council or the roads department might do something about that one day. Anyhow, 3 girls, Esther, Daisy and Jessie, my mother. It's forgetting my mother. Oh dear. And my mother, and I've got Joy, who's her great-grandmother were the Hammonds too. And Daisy, her mother, and my mother Jessie married, and they lived here all of their lives. And I've got my daughter, who is I think 5th generation, and she still lives in Glenbrook. And we've got Harry, he's 6th generation. But when he was a child, left Glenbrook, but now he's back home here looking after his grandmother, which is lovely. Yes, and I'm still here. I think I might be the oldest one here today, but probably not the oldest in. I was actually born in Glenbrook. My mother's aunt, which was a Hammond, Selina Hammond, she married John Hunter, and she was a midwife. So I was actually born in our home in Ross Street by a midwife, my great aunt, and I've been here ever since. And I hate to say it, but next month it'll be 89 years. So I think I'll be taken out in a box. But anyhow, getting on with this. Lost my place now.
I get what, yes, I think that's all I've got to say. My mother and father, or my grandfather, they're already on plaques that we did earlier, so that's why they're not being spoken about today. Okay.
And for me, as a relative newcomer, only 30 years in the community, it's truly remarkable to hear of what all of your forebears have done, and you yourselves. Good communities are made up by the people who form them, who are part of them, and the fact that this is such a beautiful community comes from the families who made it happen. So humbling to be here. Thank you all very much for your contribution, and to the Historical Society. These days are important, and I just think it's fantastic that all you volunteers, care enough to preserve this history. I really am so pleased to be able to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.